Dorian, what the hell is going on? Aaron Lyson's voice was tight with panic. As she huddled over the secondary display, the numbers growing faster than human comprehension. These aren't any symptoms we've seen before. The first alarm buzzed in the quiet of the laboratory, its harsh tones slicing through noisy machinery. He didn't answer immediately, eyes still glued to the screen. The data was all wrong. The virus wasn't just biological. It was changing, and it wasn't just a disease. It was something otherworldly, beyond the capacity of Earth's scientific understanding. Set up the new scans, Dorian barked, moving quickly around the lab. His boots silent on the polished floor, he snapped on a set of gloves, his mind already racing, analyzing the data. Fever, nausea, affected nervous systems, the usual signs, but something more. Something he couldn't place yet, something they hadn't anticipated. Are we sure this is the same strain? Aaron asked, her fingers flying over the laser plasma display, each keystroke punctuating the growing tension. The effects are escalating, but it's not acting like any virus we've cataloged. Dorian's voice dropped, cold with the weight of realization. No, this isn't any virus we've ever seen. He turned sharply to face her, eyes hardening. This is something else. They must have engineered it. It's not just biological, it's quantum.
Quantum?
Aaron's eyebrows knit together. What the hell do you mean by that? Before Dorian could answer, a sharp flash of light from the corner of the room made both of them freeze. A brief, irregular flicker, almost imperceptible, came from the heads-up display. He turned back to the screen, eyes widening. The cells under analysis were rearranging themselves. DNA strands were shifting, their bonds not just weakening, but becoming malleable. Organic matter was reprogramming itself. This virus is messing with their very atomic bonds, Dorian muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. The bonds between the molecules, the very forces that hold life itself together. His thoughts raced. This wasn't a disease. It was a reality-bending force, a bioengineered quantum manipulator, designed not just to infect, but to restructure life at the most fundamental level. The door to the lab burst open, and the sharp voice of Commander Roland Ferrix cut through the tension. Dorian, we've just had reports of mass infections across the globe. The numbers are climbing, rapidly. Dorian barely glanced at him. He was too focused on the display, where the data now began to show something even more alarming. Cells that were adjusting themselves, adapting faster than natural processes should allow. Roland moved closer, his boots thumping lightly, as he glanced over Dorian's shoulder. What are we looking at here, Vasquez? Not good, Dorian said flatly. We've got an alien virus, and it's rewriting human biology from the inside out. Minutes later, the gravity of the situation hit the team. Governments across the globe had already declared an emergency. Quarantine zones were being set up in major cities, but Dorian knew that the problem went deeper than containment. This wasn't a typical viral outbreak. It was a new form of life. We're not dealing with a virus that kills, Dorian said, his voice heavy with realization. We're dealing with a virus that's evolving life itself. His fingers tapped at the console. Look at this. It's manipulating the very genetic code. The way it reacts, it's using quantum fields to rewrite molecular structures. It's not just infecting, it's rewriting reality. Aaron stared at the data in shock. You're saying, this thing doesn't just kill, it changes us, it changes everything. Dorian nodded grimly. Yes, and it's spreading faster than we can keep up with. By the time the full effects hit, it may be too late. A loud crash echoed from the hallway outside, followed by urgent footsteps. One of the team members sprinted into the lab, out of breath. Reports coming in from Tokyo. People are seeing things. The man faltered, struggling to find the word. They're saying the walls are bending. People are feeling gravity shift as they walk. Dorian's eyes went cold as he exchanged a brief look with Aaron. It's begun, he whispered under his breath. The sense of helplessness started to mount. The virus wasn't just causing fever or headaches. It was altering perception, disrupting the most fundamental laws of the universe. How could Earth combat something that bent reality? Roland, Dorian said, his tone urgent. We need to accelerate our research on this virus. We have to understand how it's changing us, before it's too late. Roland clenched his fists. You think it's coming from an alien race? Dorian hesitated, eyes flicking over the data feed. It has to be. No human science could have engineered something like this. And if they sent it here, They didn't expect us to adapt like this. They never thought we'd evolve. Dorian's fingers flew over the display, tapping out a series of commands, setting up the next round of tests. He wasn't just trying to understand the virus. He was racing to find a way to control it. He couldn't let Earth spiral into chaos. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. As he worked, the world outside seemed to descend further into madness. From the windows of the lab, he could see the distant glow of chaos in the streets below. Fire trucks racing by, helicopters hovering above, and in the sky, a subtle shimmer, a ripple, as if reality itself were starting to warp. "You'd better come see this," Roland said quiet. Dorian turned, following him out of the lab. The hallway was crowded with scientists, military personnel and emergency workers, all talking over each other, their voices overlapping in a growing din of panic. The glass windows along the corridor had a strange, almost liquid quality, distorting the world outside. Dorian blinked, then looked at Roland. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice low. "It's not just the virus anymore," Roland said grimly. "It's everything. The laws of physics. They're breaking down. Something bigger is happening. Dorian, something none of us can control." Dorian turned back to the display. The virus was not only affecting life, it was warping the very structure of reality itself. The planet was no longer simply facing an outbreak. It was facing a collapse of its very existence. "Then we're not just fighting a virus," Dorian said, his voice steady despite the growing chaos. "We're fighting for the future of everything. Humanity's evolution has already begun, but we need to control it before it controls." Dorian's fingers hovered over the keys, the laser plasma display flashing rapidly as his eyes scanned the incoming data. The virus, once a looming specter of biological annihilation, had begun to evolve in ways he hadn't anticipated. The initial reports had been clear: flu-like symptoms, an unrelenting fever, and a crushing fatigue. But now, a pattern was emerging that defied all reason. The first anomaly appeared in a subject from the outskirts of Buenos Aires. The patient, a man in his early 20s, had displayed the typical signs of the infection, but within 24 hours, his condition had taken a curious turn. Instead of deteriorating, he showed signs of enhanced mental clarity. He could remember dates and sequences with perfect accuracy, even reorganize physical objects in the room with nothing more than a casual glance. And this wasn't just coincidence. It was happening with others. Dorian's mind raced. "This isn't right," he muttered to himself. The virus wasn't just altering the biological systems of its victims. It was rewriting the human genome. Genetic mutation was accelerating at a rate far beyond what natural evolution would allow. In his isolation, the distant sound of sirens filled the background as more data streamed in. Governments were scrambling, but Dorian knew the truth. Humanity was no longer dealing with a simple pathogen. "Dr. Vazquez," Aaron Lyson's voice called out from behind him. She was standing at the far end of the lab, hands clenched around a tablet. "You need to see this." Dorian turned, already sensing the urgency in her tone. "What is it?" Aaron showed him the tablet, displaying the results of the latest round of testing. One of the subjects in New Delhi had begun to exhibit a strange ability to manipulate gravitational forces. Objects around him, small, everyday items, hovered a few inches off the ground as he walked past them. The human mind had never been capable of this. It wasn't just a case of an infection that weakened humanity. It was a catalyst for a new type of human. His eyes locked onto the screen, the implications sinking in. "It's happening faster than I thought," Dorian whispered. "The virus is accelerating their evolution. It's not just biological, it's quantum manipulation at a cellular level. It's turning them into something else." Aaron's hand gripped his arm as her voice wavered. "Can we stop it?" "I don't know," Dorian replied, his voice tight. The weight of what he was about to say settled on his chest like a ton of bricks. "But we need to understand it. We need to figure out how the virus is interacting with their DNA, how it's allowing them to bypass physical laws." The air in the room seemed to shift as Dorian turned back to the laser plasma display, his mind whirring with new possibility. The infected weren't just surviving. They were adapting in ways no one could have foreseen. Each individual was altering, not just their body but the world around them. Hours passed as Dorian ran simulations, each one revealing more about the virus's impact. Across the globe, isolated reports came in of telekinetic-like abilities, spontaneous bursts of superhuman strength, and strange disturbances in gravity. His fingers flew over the console, typing furiously as his mind raced. Dorian, Erin's voice broke through the fog of his thoughts. Her words slow, heavy. Look at this. He turned to her, his brow furrowing as she presented another round of data. A series of anomalies had been detected in the electromagnetic spectrum. It was subtle at first, but Dorian knew what he was seeing. Humanity was harnessing the very forces of nature: gravity, electromagnetism, atomic energy. It was as if they had unlocked access to the building blocks of the universe itself. "We've created something terrifying," Dorian said softly, his voice strained. "This virus didn't just infect them, it's empowering them." At that moment, a series of loud booming knocks echoed from the lab's door. It was Roland Ferrix, the military commander, always on edge, his boots echoing in the silent hallway. "Dr. Vazquir, we've got a situation." Roland's voice was tight, his eyes shadowed with urgency. "Reports are flooding in. People aren't just reporting symptoms anymore. They're changing. I need to know what's going on." Dorian glanced back at the display, trying to process the magnitude of what was unfolding. "It's worse than we thought. This isn't just a viral infection. It's a biological catalyst that's tapping into quantum forces. They're becoming something else. Evolving, but not just physically. They're manipulating reality itself." Roland's face hardened as he processed the implications and the military response. "How are we supposed to fight that?" Dorian shook his head. "Right now we can't. We're not just fighting a virus. We're fighting for control over reality itself." As the news of strange phenomena spread across the globe, the world scrambled to understand the changes. People were starting to reshape their surroundings, sometimes without realizing it. Dorian couldn't help but wonder how many people would become aware of their powers before it was too late. In the back of his mind, he knew that the virus was likely a test, a weapon engineered by a species far more advanced than humanity. But what were they testing? Dorian stood alone in the lab, staring at the data on the display. The room felt smaller, the very fabric of space, distorting around him as the simulations ran, showing the shifting laws of physics. The virus was acting like a cosmic key, unlocking doors to a reality humanity had never dreamed of. "This is bigger than we thought," he murmured, feeling the weight of the realization settle into his bones. "If humanity's evolution accelerates like this, we won't be just surviving the Salvorei. We'll reshape the very universe they thought they controlled." Outside the lab, the tension in the streets had reached a fever pitch. As the virus spread, strange electromagnetic pulses began to pulse from the infected, creating chaotic bursts of energy that interfered with electronics. The air was charged. Everything felt alive and yet on the brink of collapse. Dorian turned back to Erin, his expression determined. "We need to accelerate our research. If we can understand how this virus is interacting with the human genome, we can weaponize it. We can fight back." Erin nodded slowly, her eyes narrowed with focus. "Do you think we can control it?" Dorian took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he touched the screen. "Not yet, but we have no choice. If we don't, the Salvorei will realize what we've become, and it won't be us they're trying to conquer anymore." As the room darkened, a sudden flash of light from the display illuminated Dorian's face, the glowing quantum patterns now visibly shifting in ways that defied explanation. Humanity was no longer helpless. It was becoming something else, something far greater than anyone had anticipated. The end of the world as they knew it had already begun, but humanity's true transformation, that was just starting. The hum of activity in the lab had reached a fever pitch, the tension palpable as Dorian stepped back from the observation window, his gaze fixed on the subject inside. The man was sitting still, his eyes closed, breath steady. But the air around him seemed to pulse with an almost unseen energy. The molecular scanner on Dorian's display flickered with data, the numbers dancing too quickly for his liking. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. "I've never seen anything like this." Erin's voice broke through his thoughts, a tinge of awe in her tone. She was standing at the other end of the room, her fingers hovering nervously over the control panel. "He's manipulating the gravity around him. It's not much, but it's definitely there." Dorian's fingers ran over the edge of his clipboard as he turned to her. "I know. I'm seeing it too." His words were steady, but his pulse raced. "We're witnessing the future. If we don't control this, it won't just be humanity evolving. It'll be humanity rewriting its place in the cosmos. The subject's arm twitched, and the surrounding air density shifted as a piece of paper on the table near him floated upward with no visible cause. It lingered for a moment before dropping back to the surface, an imperceptible change in the world's natural forces, yet one that made Dorian's heart pound. Run the analysis again, he instructed, eyes narrowing. Focus on the gravitational field around him. Aaron tapped away at the display, and the screen immediately updated. The numbers were off the charts. Dorian, these aren't just fluctuations. He's creating pockets of gravity, small but definite. This isn't just telekinesis or a parlor trick. He's manipulating the very fabric of space-time. Dorian nodded, a tight smile pulling at his lips. We're no longer just dealing with a virus. We're dealing with a quantum force that's shaping these people into something we can't control, but we need to learn how to control it. A low murmur of disbelief rose in the room. The sound of shuffling feet echoed down the hallway as more team members filtered in. But Dorian paid them no mind. His focus remained on the subject, still seated calmly in the center of the room. How far do you think this goes? Erin asked, her eyes flicking to the scanner and then back to Dorian, her voice full of quiet concern. He hesitated, then glanced at her. This is just the beginning. The more we test, the deeper we go, the more powerful these abilities are going to get. We're playing with fire. At that moment, the subject stirred. His eyes snapped open, his expression calm and controlled. Then, to Dorian's shock, he raised his hand. The lights in the room flickered and dimmed. The laser plasma displays glitched momentarily. The holographic interface malfunctioned. It was a brief disturbance, but Dorian caught it immediately. The subject didn't seem startled. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded, almost as if in acknowledgement of the chaos that had erupted around him. His control over the gravitational field was far beyond what they had anticipated. Aaron, Dorian said sharply, prepare the quantum resonance chamber. We need to amplify this. If we push this energy to the next level, we'll understand how they're manipulating these forces. Aaron nodded, without hesitation, already moving to the equipment in the corner of the lab. Dorian's mind raced as he processed the new data. The virus, though foreign, had a clear, systematic approach. It wasn't just evolving the human body. It was rewriting its very nature. As Aaron worked, Dorian turned his attention to the subject. He couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, the one that had taken root since he first discovered the virus's true capabilities. They had awakened something that might just be too powerful to control. And now, they had to decide whether they would be masters of this force, or whether it would consume them all. Suddenly, the subject's body jerked, and he fell to the floor with a soft but distinct thud. A small tremor ran through the room as the gravitational pull intensified. Get him up, Dorian barked. Aaron hurried to his side, but Dorian moved forward, his hand raised to stop her. Hold on. Something's not right. His voice was low, cautious. The subject's body was writhing now, convulsing as though the energy within him was spiraling out of control. Don't touch him, Dorian ordered, stepping back. The subject was now on the ground, trembling, his breath coming in uneven gasps. Quantum flux was radiating from his body, vibrating at frequencies that Dorian didn't fully understand. He's overheating, Aaron said, stepping back herself, visibly shaken. Dorian's mind was racing. It's a cascade effect. His body can't handle this level of control. It's a balancing act. If we don't stabilize him, the energy will consume him entirely. The subject's eyes flickered open again, this time with intensity, as if staring right through Dorian. There was no fear, no panic, just a calm understanding. Dorian, Aaron whispered, her eyes wide. It's too much. We can't control it. We've made them too powerful. His gaze didn't leave the subject. We don't have a choice. This is the future. If we don't figure out how to harness it, we'll be the ones who break first. A loud crash interrupted their conversation as a spatial distortion ripped through the room. The subject's body buckled, and the air warped like a ripple in water. Dorian's hand shot out instinctively, and he reached for the console to regain control, but the field was too strong. The subject collapsed entirely now, the energy fluctuations causing violent shocks to ripple across the lab. Prepare for containment, Dorian shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos. The air was thick, the fabric of space itself, seemingly unraveling. Then in a brief moment of clarity, the subject's body stilled, and the room fell silent. Dorian exhaled sharply, feeling the tension in the room release, but his heart was still pounding. He looked at Aaron, who was equally stunned. That wasn't supposed to happen, she said, her voice barely audible. We were supposed to control it, not lose. We've just witnessed the next step, Dorian muttered, his voice distant as he watched the quiet aftermath of the chaos. We need to learn how to control it, before they do. The shifting energy around them was settling, but Dorian couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had crossed a line. He couldn't deny the power they had just witnessed, but the price of that power was already becoming clear. The virus wasn't just a means of evolution, it was redefining humanity's very essence. And soon, the Salvorei would find that humanity was no longer something they could conquer, it was something they had awakened, something they could never control. Launch the countermeasures. Now. Dorian's voice broke through the chaos in the command center. His fingers moved with precision over the heads-up display, his mind racing as he watched the incoming signals. The Salvorei fleet was arriving just as the world's quantum manipulations began to evolve from theory to reality. Humanity had long feared an invasion, but now the tables had turned. Deploy the gravity shields, Roland Ferrix barked to his team, eyes trained on the holographic map of Earth's atmosphere. He was standing at the far side of the room, his face tight with tension. We're not going down without a fight. Dorian looked up at him, his brow furrowing as he watched the Salvorei ships approach. They were sleek, advanced, elegantly designed weapons of war, but the alien fleet had one fatal flaw. They had underestimated humanity. The virus that had been sent to weaken them had instead catalyzed humanity's evolution. The quantum-based weaponry humans now wielded was not just advanced, it was a game-changer. Across the room, Erin Lyson was already directing the laser plasma displays that were tracking the movements of the alien fleet. Her fingers moved rapidly, trying to keep up with the data streaming in from all across the globe. They're not responding to our signals, Erin muttered, scanning the readings. They must be using some kind of advanced jamming technology. Dorian took a deep breath. It doesn't matter. We've been adapting, and we have a better chance than they think. Let's hit them before they get too close. The tension in the room thickened. The Salvorei had long been considered the apex predators of the galaxy. Their fleets had crushed entire star systems without breaking a sweat, yet they hadn't anticipated that the very virus they had released would turn Earth into something far more dangerous than they could imagine. Roland's voice echoed again as the first of the alien ships entered Earth's atmosphere. All systems go. I repeat, all systems go. Activate the graviton cannons, Dorian instructed, his gaze fixed on the incoming data. A wave of subtle electromagnetic pulses flooded his senses, but he could feel it. Something had shifted in the air. Earth's new reality was taking shape. The virus was no longer just a mutation. It was a force reshaping the laws of nature in favor of humanity. As the Salvorei fleet descended into the atmosphere, they didn't notice the change right away, but within minutes the gravitational field began to shift. As the first graviton pulses surged through the air, the gravitational shields around Earth flared to life, sending ripples of distorted space-time through the sky. The Salvorei ships slowed down as they encountered the unseen force, a force they couldn't comprehend, a force that shouldn't exist. Direct hit, Erin shouted from her console. Gravity wells are affecting their navigation. They can't adapt fast enough. The first alien ship veered off course, its sleek body rattling as the gravitational anomaly overwhelmed its systems. One by one, other ships followed suit, unable to deal with the sudden shift in the laws of physics they'd relied on for centuries. Deploy the quantum reversal fields, Dorian ordered. Time to send them a message. A low hum filled the room as the energy fields activated, sweeping over the alien fleet. The space-time continuum twisted, creating local black holes that began to draw in the enemy ships, their engines faltering as the gravitational pull intensified. Some ships tried to maneuver, but the field was too strong. The Salvorei had been accustomed to their superior technology, superior to any species in the galaxy. Now, they were helpless against a power they didn't understand. Are we sure this is working? Roland asked, his voice tense, watching the display as the Salvorei fleet began to break apart. We need more time, Dorian replied, his voice calm but edged with urgency. Their technology is still holding up longer than we expected, but we're not going to give them any more breathing room. Outside, the first gravitational pulse made its presence known in the sky. It wasn't a natural event. It was human-made, a quantum weapon, built from the very heart of the virus. For the first time in Earth's history, humanity was fighting back with real power. In the space above, the sky seemed to twist and ripple. The light of the sun bent and distorted, as the quantum fields altered the space-time around them. The Salvorei fleet, once so confident in their might, now found themselves at the mercy of humanity's newfound ability. The gravitational pulses intensified, and one of the alien ships began to crumble under the pressure. "Initiate Phase 2, Dorian said, his fingers moving across the console. "It's time to push them out." With a violent shift in the field, the Salvorei ships found themselves pulled further into the gravitational anomaly, their weapons now useless, as the Earth-based quantum shields interfered with their communication and energy system. The Salvorei were trapped, caught in a force they could not understand. "They're retreating," Erin said, disbelief in her voice. She stared at the monitors, her eyes wide as the first signs of victory appeared. "We're actually doing it." Dorian stood still for a moment, his gaze focused on the gravitational pulses that still rippled through the sky. The first battle was over, but he knew this was only the beginning. "We've just shown them what we're capable of," he said quietly, "but they're not going to back down. The real fight is just starting. Activate the quantum shield disruptors. We need to hit them before they can adapt," Dorian ordered, his voice low, commanding. The room buzzed with frantic energy, the hum of consoles and the sharp clacking of keys barely audible over the tension. Each member of the team moved with practiced precision, their focus fixed entirely on the task ahead. It was more than a fight for survival now. It was a test of intellect, of humanity's ability to bend the very laws of nature to their will. Dorian stood before the laser plasma display, eyes fixed on the glowing map. The Salvorei fleet, now several hundred strong, was advancing toward Earth. Their movements methodical and calculated. They had long believed in their technological superiority, but now, for the first time, humanity had a chance to rewrite the rules. A subtle shift had occurred, a shift that the Salvorei couldn't predict, couldn't understand. Humanity, armed with their quantum manipulation, was ready to take the fight directly to them. "Sir," Erin called out from across the room, her voice sharp, "they're already attempting to hack our communication networks. They're using their own quantum fields to destabilize our systems." Dorian's lips curled into a grim smile. "We anticipated that. Let's make sure they don't get a chance to play their game." He gestured to Roland. "Activate gravitational inversion fields. Let's show them just how much control we've gained." The tactical team, positioned along the perimeter of the war room, nodded, fingers flying over the controls. Outside the atmosphere, the first wave of quantum pulses were launched, sending waves of gravitational instability directly into the path of the incoming fleet. For a moment nothing happened, but then the Salvorei fleet began to sway, their ships veering off course as their navigation systems scrambled. "Direct hit," Roland's voice broke through the tension, and the air around them felt charged with static. "Their systems are failing." The battlefield, though invisible, was alive with the force of humanity's rebellion. Dorian leaned forward, watching the enemy ships as they struggled against the quantum barriers humanity had set in place. The Salvorei were a formidable force, their military machines honed through centuries of dominance. But they had never faced anything like this. Time itself was shifting under their feet. "We've got one shot at this," Dorian said, his voice taut with focus. "Once they realize what we're doing, they'll counter. Prepare the quantum bombs. We need them to be destabilized long enough to launch the final blow." The air in the room seemed to freeze for a moment. A collective breath held as the team moved quickly, activating the final phase of their quantum weaponry. Dorian couldn't afford to hesitate, not now. The Salvorei, masters of conquest, were learning just how fragile their supremacy had been. In the vastness of space, the first signs of chaos began to unfold. The Salvorei ships, previously untouchable, were now caught in a web of quantum interference. Light itself bent around them, as gravitational fields surged and collapsed, creating unstable pockets of reality that warped their movements. "What are they doing?" Roland's voice was barely a whisper, disbelief creeping into his tone, as they watched the enemy struggle to regain control. "They're fighting against something they can't see," Dorian muttered, "something they don't understand." He turned back to the laser plasma display, eyes scanning the fluctuating data. "Their technology is based on conventional physical laws, but we've broken those rules. We've changed the game." As the Salvorei scrambled to regain their bearings, Dorian's mind raced. The quantum bombs were ready. Energy shields hummed quietly, ready to disrupt anything that came too close. Humanity's defenses, once seen as primitive, had now been transformed into weapons capable of holding their own against one of the galaxy's most advanced empires. "It's time," Dorian said sharply, standing tall. "We hit them where it hurt." He turned to Erin, Who activated the final quantum bombs? The first pulse shot through the atmosphere, barely visible to the naked eye, but its effects were immediate. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the very air around them distorting as the quantum bomb released its energy. Within seconds, the Salvorei ships began to twist and warp, pulled into localized black holes, their bodies breaking apart as they were sucked into the gravitational anomalies. The fleet that had once dominated the stars was now scattered, their weaponry useless as they were torn apart by the very forces they had taken for granted. The world held its breath as the Salvorei realized too late what they had unleashed. Humanity had risen. "They're retreating," Erin said, a flicker of disbelief in her voice. "It's working, Dorian. They're actually retreating." Dorian didn't answer at first. His eyes remained fixed on the display, watching as the last remnants of the Salvorei fleet struggled to escape the grip of their own quantum manipulation. It was a sight he'd never imagined in his wildest dreams, a once unstoppable force, now broken apart by humanity's unseen hand. But even as they began to retreat, Dorian knew the battle was far from over. The Salvorei had underestimated humanity once, but they wouldn't make the same mistake again. The game had changed, but it was just the beginning of a longer war. "We've won the first round," Dorian finally said, his voice quiet but resolute. "But they'll be back, and next time, we won't be able to rely on surprises. We need to be ready. Launch quantum charges. All sectors. Prepare for Phase 2, Dorian's voice rang through the command center, sharp and direct. He could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on his chest as his eyes tracked the movement of the Salvorei fleet. On the heads-up display, the invaders had come for Earth, expecting a fight, but they hadn't anticipated this. They hadn't prepared for humanity's quantum power. The Salvorei had underestimated Earth's response. They believed that their advanced technology would make quick work of humanity, but that was before Earth's resistance forces had organized, before humans learned to bend the laws of reality. Now, humanity wasn't just surviving. They were becoming the aggressors. It wasn't just a war for Earth's survival anymore. It was a battle for supremacy in the universe. On the main view screen, the first wave of Salvorei ships approached Earth's atmosphere, their sleek forms cutting through the void. But this time, the humans were ready. Dorian's fingers were steady as they hovered over the controls. The final quantum bombs were primed, ready to be launched. As the Salvorei ships closed in, a ripple of energy shot out from Earth's atmosphere, distorting the fabric of space itself. The gravitational vortexes created by the bombs spun outward, pulling the Salvorei ships into their grasp. It was as if the very forces of the universe were answering humanity's defiance. Ships, once sleek and indestructible, were now helpless against the quantum anomalies humanity had developed. It was a reality-shattering display of power. Earth's final weapon was now in motion. Gravitational waves at 75%. Erin Lyson's voice was calm but laced with the undercurrent of urgency as she watched the data flood in. Incoming ships are being destabilized. They're losing control. Dorian's eyes never left the screen, watching as the first Salvorei ship buckled under the immense pressure of the local gravity fields. It was a quick, decisive moment. The Salvorei fleet had come in with their usual arrogance, but they were no match for Earth's ability to bend reality. "They didn't see this coming," Dorian muttered under his breath, barely recognizing the pride creeping into his voice. But he knew better than to underestimate the enemy. The Salvorei might have been caught off guard, but they were far from defeat. "Prepare the black hole bombs. Phase 2 is ready," Dorian ordered, turning toward the tactical screen. Humanity had proven its ability to adapt, but now was the moment to attack with overwhelming force. As the data scrolled across the screen, the quantum weapons were activated. The first black hole bomb detonated with a crackle of energy that split the sky. A void of nothingness erupted at the center of the Salvorei fleet, sucking in debris, fragments of destroyed ships, and even light itself. The gravitational distortion created by the bomb was like nothing the Salvorei had ever encountered. Their ships were sucked into the event horizon, unable to escape the overwhelming force. "Impact confirmed," Erin reported. Her voice held a note of disbelief. "The enemy is breaking apart. Their systems are completely compromised." But Dorian wasn't done. Humanity wasn't just defending Earth anymore. They were waging a war against an empire that thought it was invincible. "Deploy the next round," he ordered, his voice unwavering as he watched the destruction unfold. More black holes, more localized gravitational traps that tore through the Salvorei fleet, destabilizing their remaining forces. On the battlefield, the Salvorei were retreating, disorganized, scrambling to regroup. But it was too late. Earth had taken control of the battlefield. and the unseen forces that had been lurking within humanity's genetic mutation were now on full display. "They can't counter us," Roland Ferrick said, his voice laced with disbelief. He stood at Dorian's side, eyes fixed on the shrinking Salvorei fleet. This is unbelievable. We're not just surviving anymore," Dorian said, his voice focused, carrying the weight of this newfound power. "We're reshaping the war." A new wave of Salvorei ships attempted to reassert control, but they were disoriented. Their ships pulled in every direction as the gravity fields destabilized their formations. Their weapons were useless against humanity's new ability. One by one, the alien ships began to fall, their massive forms crumbling under the pressure of the quantum fields humanity had unleashed. "It's over. They can't win this," Roland murmured, as he watched the fleet crumble. Dorian didn't answer immediately. He watched as the last remaining Salvorei ships tried to retreat, but the damage was done. Humanity had proven that they were no longer weak. They had turned the tide of the war, and they weren't stopping now. As the last of the enemy ships were pulled into the gravitational void, a final pulse of energy emanated from Earth's defenses. Dorian's heart pounded in his chest. The victory was undeniable. Humanity was no longer a passive force. They had become the aggressors, rewriting the laws of nature and bending them to their will. Phase 3 completed. "Earth control is established," Erin said, her voice filled with awe. But Dorian knew this wasn't just about winning one battle. It was about humanity's place in the galaxy. The Salvorei had made a fatal mistake in underestimating humanity's potential. Dorian's gaze shifted to the main view screen, where the remnants of the Salvorei fleet floated aimlessly, helpless against the forces humanity had mastered. The energy waves from the black hole bombs still rippled through the remains of the ships, leaving behind a void of silence in their wake. The gravitational vortexes had torn apart not just the fleet, but the very perception of Salvorei supremacy. "We've just shown them what we're capable of," Dorian said, his voice steady, but a hint of something else lingered in the air. This was victory, but it was also a new beginning. Humanity was no longer weak, it was dominant, and the Salvorei were about to find that out. "Activate the dimensional rift generators. All units, prepare to deploy." Dorian's command was swift and unyielding, his voice cutting through the tension in the war room. The weight of the moment was pressing on him, but his focus was razor-sharp. The Salvorei had underestimated humanity, and now they were on the defensive. The balance of power had shifted. Humanity was no longer a passive force. They had become the aggressors, and the Salvorei were finding themselves trapped in a war they couldn't control. The laser plasma displays flickered as the coordinates were set. Dorian's fingers hovered over the controls, the countdown echoing in his mind. He could almost feel the distortion in the air, the subtle shift in the laws of space, as humanity's powers began to converge into a single, overwhelming force. "We can't afford to hesitate any longer," Dorian said, more to himself than to anyone in the room. "We have the power now. Let's use it." Across the room, Roland Ferrick stood at the helm of the tactical team, his face set in a grim line. The Salvorei fleet was growing larger on the heads-up displays, but this time it wasn't a sight that inspired fear. It fueled their resolve. "Quantum shields ready, Dorian," Roland reported, his voice steady, unwavering. "We've stabilized the gravitational pulses, and the dimensional rifts are active. We're good to go. Deploy them now." Dorian's words were simple, but the weight behind them was undeniable. This was the moment they had been preparing for. The final strike. Out in the void of space, the Salvorei fleet continued its advance, confident in their strength. But as they neared the atmosphere, everything changed. The first wave of gravitational anomalies struck, warping the very space around them. Light began to bend, the once solid forms of the alien ships now appearing distorted, as if reality itself was shifting. "What the hell is happening?" shouted Zonkor, the Salvorei commander, as his ship lurched violently. His officers scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. The gravitational vortex they were caught in wasn't just pulling them off course. It was tearing apart their communication systems, their weapons, and their sense of certainty. "We've lost contact with command. Deploy countermeasures. Activate the field disruptor." But their orders came too late. Dorian's quantum weapons, powered by humanity's mastery over space-time, had already locked the Salvorei in a battle they could never win. As the dimensional rifts expanded, the Salvorei fleet found itself caught in a series of cascading gravitational forces. Their ships began to fall apart, torn apart not by explosive weapons, but by the invisible forces humanity had harnessed. Target their power cores. We can't let them recover. Dorian's voice cut through the tension. He could see the data on the display. The Salvorei fleet was disintegrating, their systems failing as humanity's quantum powers twisted their reality into chaos. In the command center, the team worked with precision, tracking the downfall of the alien ship. The energy of the black hole bombs surged through the room, feeding into the dimensional rift generators, amplifying their power. With each pulse, another wave of Salvorei ships crumbled, sucked into the event horizon of the quantum voids humanity had created. They can't fight it. They can't even comprehend it. Erin's voice trembled, but there was a strange sense of awe in her tone as she watched the dimensional rifts continue to consume the enemy. We're winning, Dorian. Dorian didn't respond right away. His mind was still calculating, analyzing the next move. The quantum manipulation they had unleashed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, but even in this moment of triumph, he knew that the Salvorei wouldn't be beaten so easily. They were a ruthless enemy, and they wouldn't stop until they had eradicated humanity. We've only taken down the first wave, Dorian said finally, his eyes fixed on the display. Prepare the second phase. We need to finish this now. The battlefield was shifting by the second. The space-time fabric that had once been their enemy now served humanity's will. The Salvorei, scattered and broken, tried to regroup, but it was clear they were already at a disadvantage. The energy shields humanity had created were impenetrable, and their quantum weapons made their conventional tactics obsolete. Every move the Salvorei made, humanity countered with an elegance and precision that left the invaders scrambling for answers. We're not just surviving anymore. We're decimating them, Roland. They're decimating them, Roland said, his eyes fixed on the cascading destruction. His words held a note of disbelief, but there was confidence in his voice now, a confidence that came from knowing they had turned the tables. Launch the final wave. Dorian's voice was steady now. He had seen the results, but it wasn't enough yet. The Salvorei had to be broken, demoralized and completely defeated. The final black hole bomb was launched, a single devastating pulse that erupted in space, its core ripping apart the remnants of the Salvorei fleet. The last of their ships were pulled into the abyss, their hulls crumbling into dust, their power cores overwhelmed by the immense gravitational forces. In a matter of seconds, the enemy was gone. In the war room, a tense silence followed the explosion, only broken by the beeping of data. As the final counts came in, humanity had won. Not just a single battle, but a turning point in the war. We did it, Erin whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Dorian looked at her, his face set, his mind already turning toward the next challenge. This isn't over, he said quietly, his voice low, but we've shown them that we're not weak. We're not afraid. We're the ones who hold the power now. As Dorian turned back to the screen, watching the remnants of the Salvorei fleet dissipate, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. Humanity had transformed from a vulnerable species on the brink of extinction to an empowered force capable of bending reality itself. The war was far from over, but humanity had finally seized control of its own fate. They had become the dominant power, and the universe would never be the same again. All systems are at maximum capacity. Roland Ferrix's voice cut through the tension in the command room, the intensity of his words vibrating in the air. The war was nearing its end, but there was no room for complacency. The Salvorei were desperate, and now in a final desperate attempt to crush Earth's defenses, they were launching their last assault. Dorian's gaze was fixed on the heads-up display, where the final Salvorei fleet was coming into view, their ships massive, their weapons deadly. Yet, unlike before, humanity wasn't responding with fear. The energy in the room was charged with defiance. They had mastered the very laws of the universe, and now, the quantum manipulation humanity had once only dreamed of had become the very weapon they would use to reshape the battlefield. They're trying to break through, Dorian. Erin's voice was steady, but there was an underlying sense of urgency. We need to activate the quantum defense matrix now. Dorian nodded, his face set in determination. We've come this far. We won't let them take this from us. The first wave of Salvorei ships entered Earth's orbit, their weapons charged and aimed, prepared for the final onslaught. They expected Earth to crumble before their might, But they weren't prepared for the quantum shields humanity had now perfected. The Salvorei's weapons fired, but as the beams reached Earth's atmosphere, they were distorted and scattered by the gravitational anomalies that hummed through space. The energy shields humanity had built not only deflected the shots, they bent the energy around them, rendering their enemies' weaponry useless. "Deploy the graviton pulse bombs," Dorian ordered, his voice unwavering. Now, a surge of power flooded the systems as the graviton bombs deployed into the heart of the Salvorei fleet. The first explosion lit up the sky, sending shockwaves of force rippling outward, causing the alien ships to veer off course. Time and space itself warped in the wake of the blast, the very fabric of reality collapsing under the immense pressure. The Salvorei ships began to crumble, their systems collapsing one by one. Energy fields that had once been impervious to attack were now torn apart, as the spatial rifts began to tear into their hulls. The once proud fleet, capable of destroying planets, was now helpless against the force humanity had unleashed. "They're breaking apart," Erin shouted, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and awe, as she watched the Salvorei fleet deteriorate before their eyes. The alien ships twisted, as if the laws of physics themselves were rejecting the invaders. It was humanity's final weapon, reality itself, being bent to their will. But Dorian knew better than to celebrate too soon. "Keep pressure on them. We can't give them a chance to regroup." The battlefield was chaos. Energy surges clashed in the dark expanse, illuminating the distorted shapes of the Salvorei ships as they were sucked into gravitational fields, crushed under the weight of their own desperation. As Earth's forces unleashed the final wave of quantum weaponry, Dorian's mind raced, every move now a step toward ensuring humanity's ultimate victory. The dimensional rifts they had opened were not just tools of destruction, they were the ultimate weapon in their fight for survival. "They've sent reinforcements, but it's too late," Roland said, his voice hoarse with disbelief as he watched the Salvorei fleet begin to dissolve. "Their systems are already on the brink. We've got them on the run." But even as Roland spoke, Dorian's gaze remained fixed on the screen, the black hole bombs he had unleashed, pulling in more ships, tearing them apart at a molecular level. Time itself was shifting. The once formidable Salvorei fleet, now trapped in their own warped reality, was disintegrating under the quantum forces humanity had now mastered. "Target their command ship," Dorian ordered. The last massive ship that had once been the pride of the Salvorei, the beacon of their power, was now all that remained of the invading force. It was massive, a symbol of their strength, but it was about to be consumed by the very forces humanity had wielded to take control of their own destiny. The quantum bombs detonated with terrifying precision, opening gravitational rifts in the core of the command ship. It began to fold in on itself, the immense pressure of the black hole collapsing its internal structure. The final Salvorei ship, the last symbol of their failed invasion, was devoured by the very fabric of reality humanity had reshaped. In the war room, a final pulse of energy rippled through the system. Dorian stood, his heart pounding in his chest as the last remnants of the Salvorei fleet were swallowed by the quantum rifts. Earth had done it. Humanity had not only survived, they had won. "We did it," Erin whispered, her voice soft in the aftermath of the battle. "We actually did." Dorian's eyes were distant, his mind already turning to the aftermath. "This isn't over yet. The galaxy will remember what we've done here today. It's done." Dorian's voice was soft, but the weight of his words filled the room. His eyes lingered on the screens, now void of enemy signals, save for the drifting remnants of the Salvorei fleet. The final remnants of their once mighty force were little more than fragments in the vastness of space. Earth had emerged victorious. The war was over, but the battle for their future was just beginning. The heads-up displays showed the final calculations. Earth had not only survived, but had emerged as the new dominant force in the galaxy. The Salvorei, crushed and humiliated, had been forced to retreat, leaving humanity to pick up the pieces. But the true cost of this victory was still settling in. Dorian felt a strange sense of calm, but also a deep reflection. Victory had never tasted so bitter. Roland Ferrick, standing beside him, glanced at the screens, his expression unreadable. "We did what no one thought was possible. Earth is now the strongest power in the galaxy." "Yes," Dorian said, turning to face his comrade. "But at what cost? We hold the keys to reality itself, Roland. We control space-time, and what does that make us? Are we still human?" It wasn't just the war that weighed on Dorian's mind. It was the realization that humanity had crossed a line. They had once been powerless in the face of invaders. Now they wielded power beyond comprehension. They had rewritten the laws of nature itself. But was this a gift or a curse? Aaron Lyson, her face pale from exhaustion, approached Dorian. "We've won. But we've also changed," she said, her voice hesitant. "The Salvorei will never be a threat again, but the galaxy will see us differently now. They will fear us, or worse, will they try to stop us?" Dorian met her gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "They'll respect us, Aaron. If they don't, they'll face the same fate as the Salvorei." Dorian looked out the window of the command center, beyond the bustling activities in the war room, where the final reports were being processed. The once familiar view of Earth's blue skies was now tainted by a heavy weight, a shifting reality that humanity had created. Space-time no longer existed in the rigid rules it once had. Humanity had broken it and remade it in their own image. No one, not even the mightiest of alien civilizations, had ever imagined a force capable of this. The Salvorei, with their millennia of experience and strength, had believed they would dominate. They hadn't known that their very plan to destroy Earth would forge the ultimate weapon. A deep, unsettling silence fell over Dorian as he reflected on the gravity of their victory. They had done more than defeat an empire. They had forever changed the balance of the universe. The idea of using quantum manipulation for destruction, for war, felt wrong. But what choice had they had? The Salvorei had started it, and Earth had finished it. "I've prepared the quantum reversal system for deployment, Dorian," Roland said, his tone more reserved than usual. "It's time to decide. Do we use it to expand our influence, or do we take a step back?" Dorian's mind raced as he considered the implications. The reversal system wasn't just a weapon. It was the future of humanity. They could use it to reshape planets, alter gravitational fields, create new realities. The potential was limitless, but so was the danger. "We can't become the very thing we fought against," Dorian muttered under his breath. The weight of leadership was never more apparent than in moments like this. Moments where the line between defender and conqueror was razor thin. He turned toward Roland, who had been watching him intently. "We have the power to change the galaxy, but the question is, how will we use it?" Roland's gaze softened. "Humanity's future is in our hands, Dorian. We decide what kind of species we will be. We're no longer victims, but we're not gods either." Dorian nodded, his eyes narrowing in thought. "We have the chance to build something new, to create a future where we don't have to fight for every inch of survival. But we must never forget what we've lost to get here." The final remnants of the Salvorei were gone, broken beyond repair. Earth stood tall as the new reality took shape, but with the fall of the Salvorei came an unspoken truth. Victory had come at a great cost. The Salvorei had been the first to be overthrown, but they wouldn't be the last. Other forces in the galaxy would soon take notice of humanity's newfound power. They would either submit or resist. The thought of what was to come was overwhelming. Earth had risen from the ashes. Yes, but now it was an empire in its own right, and no one could predict the consequences of such a rise. The war had ended, but the galaxy was far from peaceful. Dorian stepped away from the window, a sense of finality washing over him. "We've won the war," he said, his voice carrying the weight of everything they had been through. "But now, we must decide what we stand for." Aaron, standing at his side, nodded solemnly. "Humanity has evolved, Dorian. We can either be the rulers of the galaxy, or its saviors. What will we choose?" Dorian stood still for a moment, reflecting on their transformation. They had defied the odds, reshaped reality, and taken control of their future. The fear, the uncertainty, it was gone. Now, they were masters of their destiny. But he couldn't shake the questions that lingered. They had won, yes, but what had they truly won? As the laser plasma displays faded into silence, Dorian turned toward the team. His expression was grim, yet there was an unmistakable strength behind it. "Humanity is no longer just a species," he said, his voice steady. "We are the definers of the future. The galaxy will now have to reckon with us." And as Earth's new dominance spread across the cosmos, the Salvorei's fall was only the beginning of a new era. Earth, once the underdog, had risen. The galaxy would never be the same again.